The sun hung high over the small town of Maplewood, casting a golden glow over the bustling market square. Today was a big day, the annual town auction. People from all over the region came to bid on antiques, farm tools, and a variety of oddities, all under the watchful eye of Charlie Dixon, the renowned auctioneer. Charlie was a man of reputation, his booming voice easily recognizable from a distance. His wit was sharp, his commands clear, and his presence was enough to draw anyone's attention. But there was something else that made him unforgettable: his dog, Rex. Rex was a massive German shepherd with a thick coat of fur that made him look like a force of nature. His posture was always proud, his gaze intense, and his loyalty to Charlie unshakable. The townsfolk had long since learned that if they wanted to avoid trouble at the auction, they kept their distance from Rex. The dog was infamous for his growls and snarls toward anyone who dared to come too close. People spoke in hushed tones about the dog's quick temper, but no one ever truly questioned Charlie's control over him. After all, Rex only listened to Charlie. No one else had ever dared to challenge that. Charlie's voice echoed across the square as he took his place at the front of the stage, ready to begin the auction. He was dressed in his usual tailored suit, his sleeves rolled up and his body straight. His confidence was palpable. He had been running these auctions for years, and every year, Rex stood by his side, proudly guarding his master. Today, Charlie was especially proud of the fact that no one, no matter how bold or experienced, had ever been able to take control of Rex. It was his claim to fame, his badge of honor. The finest of treasures today, folks. Charlie called out, a mischievous smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But before we get started, I must remind you of one thing. No one controls my dog but me. And I promise you, no one ever will. Rex doesn't take kindly to strangers. He glanced over at his dog, who stood perfectly still beside him, eyes scanning the crowd like a sentry guarding a castle. The crowd chuckled nervously. They knew Charlie well, and while they were all familiar with the legend of Rex's temperament, it was always part of the show. Rex was just as much a part of the auction as Charlie's booming voice and quick wit. I've had people try, Charlie continued, his voice rich with pride. Trainers, animal behaviorists, you name it. But Rex here? He's a law unto himself. So keep your distance and enjoy the show, because I guarantee you, no one here can control them. Not even if you try. The townspeople shifted uneasily, exchanging glances, but they had heard this claim year after year. Charlie's confidence was almost contagious. It was part of what made the auction such a spectacle, the promise that everything was under control, thanks to Charlie and his trusty dog. But what Charlie didn't know was that, on this very day, someone was about to challenge that claim. A young woman who had just arrived in town, with a unique set of skills and an entirely different approach to understanding dogs. And Rex, for the first time, was about to meet someone who might just prove Charlie wrong. Emma Carter had never been one for small towns. She preferred the energy of cities, the buzz of new opportunities, and the endless variety of people and experiences. But when a work opportunity led her to Maplewood, she quickly found a peace in the simplicity of country life that she hadn't expected. She rented a small cottage on the outskirts of town and began her new life as an animal trainer, specializing in dogs with behavioral issues. Emma had worked with dogs from all walks of life, from anxious, timid puppies to large, powerful breeds with serious aggression problems. But none of her clients had quite the reputation of Rex. When she first heard the townspeople talk about Charlie Dixon and his dog, she was curious. Rex was a legend, larger than life, with stories that had circulated for years about how no one could control him. Even seasoned trainers and animal specialists had tried and failed. Emma wasn't one to shy away from a challenge, and as the weeks went by, the stories about Rex began to intrigue her more and more. It wasn't just the dog's fierce nature that caught her attention, but also the way people spoke about Charlie. He wasn't just an auctioneer. He was a man of authority, and his bond with Rex was a central part of his identity. The thought of taming Rex intrigued Emma, not to show anyone up, but to understand the dog, and perhaps to help him in ways others couldn't. Dogs, she believed, needed more than just obedience training. They needed trust and a real connection with their handler. Emma decided to attend the auction, hoping to witness the dog for herself and perhaps, if the opportunity arose, learn more about Rex firsthand. She didn't expect to intervene, at least not at first, but she wanted to see if the stories she'd heard were true. The day of the auction arrived, and Emma found herself standing near the back of the crowd, watching Charlie confidently prepare for the event. She observed how Rex stood by Charlie's side, an almost regal figure. The dog's intense gaze scanned the crowd, clearly aware of every movement. It wasn't just protective instinct that Emma saw at Rex. It was a deep-rooted fear of anything unfamiliar. She was struck by the contrast between Charlie's easy confidence and Rex's clear unease around strangers. While the townsfolk enjoyed the show, laughing and chatting as they browsed the items for auction, Emma couldn't help but focus on the dog. The way he reacted to each unfamiliar face. The way he stiffened when someone got too close. It was clear to her that Rex wasn't the cold, intimidating animal others saw. No, Rex was a dog that needed guidance, a dog whose protective instincts had turned into a barrier between him and the world. As the auction went on, Emma's curiosity deepened. She felt a strong pull to step forward and try something, though she wasn't sure what it would be yet. The more she watched Rex, the more she sensed there was an opportunity to connect with him in a way that no one had before, if only she had the chance. What Charlie didn't know was that this quiet, unassuming woman standing at the back of the crowd might be the one to finally challenge his bold claim that no one could control Rex. The auction had begun with its usual hustle and bustle, but today there was an underlying tension in the air. Charlie Dixon was in his element, moving through the crowd with the energy of a showman. His booming voice carried effortlessly over the clatter of people bidding on items, his charm drawing laughter and eager bids from the crowd. But even amid all the excitement, Charlie's attention was never far from his dog, Rex. The German Shepherd stood loyally at his side, the perfect picture of a well-trained companion. Yet there was something about the way Rex carried himself today that Emma couldn't ignore. As the auction moved into full swing, Emma began to notice subtle signs that something was off. Rex's normally relaxed posture had shifted. His ears were more alert, his muscles tight, and his gaze flicked constantly around the crowd, scanning for threats. To an untrained eye, the dog appeared calm, but to Emma, a more experienced observer, it was clear that Rex was on edge. He was uneasy, tense. His usually confident demeanor now masked a simmering discomfort. Emma's eyes followed Rex as he stood close to Charlie, who was engaging the crowd with his usual banter. Despite Charlie's commanding presence, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Rex was reacting to something beneath the surface. She had seen this behavior before in other dogs who had been trained to be aggressive or overly protective, often out of fear. Rex wasn't just a tough, no-nonsense guard dog, there was something more going on. As she scanned the crowd, Emma noticed that no one seemed to be paying much attention to Rex. People were too busy bidding on antique furniture and old trinkets. But Emma saw what others didn't: Rex's discomfort, his growing anxiety. It was as if he was bracing for something he couldn't control. His body language an open invitation for trouble. Emma's instincts kicked in. She wasn't sure what was about to happen, but she had a feeling that Rex's behavior would soon escalate. The crowd around her remained unaware, completely wrapped up in the excitement of the auction. But Emma couldn't tear her eyes away from the dog. Something was building, and she wasn't sure what, but she could feel the tension mounting. Her heart quickened as Charlie continued to lead the auction, oblivious to the dog's restlessness. It wasn't long before Emma's prediction proved true. The atmosphere in the square grew more charged when a young child, laughing with excitement, dashed through the crowd. She wasn't paying attention, and before anyone could stop her, she collided with Rex. The moment the child made contact, the tension that had been building in the air exploded. Rex's deep growl rumbled through the square, low and threatening. The child froze in shock, eyes wide with fear, and for a split second, everything seemed to stop. Charlie's eyes widened, his confident smile faltering. He immediately stepped forward, calling out to Rex in his usual commanding voice. but the dog's growl only grew louder, more menacing. Emma felt a rush of adrenaline. She had seen this before. Dogs acting out when they were pushed too far or when they felt threatened. The crowd shifted nervously, muttering under their breath. It was the first time anyone had seen Rex react so strongly. Charlie's usual control over the dog was slipping, and the crowd was beginning to notice. Emma took a deep breath. She had to act before things spiraled out of control. This was the moment she had been waiting for. With steady, purposeful steps, she began to move toward Rex, her focus solely on the dog. She had no intention of challenging Charlie. Her goal was simple: to understand and calm Rex. But in doing so, she was about to take the first step in showing the town, and Charlie, that maybe, just maybe, someone else could control the dog after all. The air was thick with tension as the child stood frozen, staring at Rex. The German Shepherd's low, guttural growls vibrated through the crowd, and the once festive atmosphere of the auction now felt unnervingly quiet. People shifted uneasily, unsure of what to do, as Charlie tried to regain control of the situation. His voice, usually so commanding, wavered slightly as he called out to Rex. "Rex, quiet. Settle down." Charlie's tone was firm, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his command that hadn't been there before. Rex, however, wasn't responding. His eyes remained locked on the child, his body rigid with tension. The dog's deep growls turned into sharp barks, causing several people nearby to flinch and instinctively back away. The child, who had only been innocently running through the crowd, now stood terrified, her hands clutched tightly to her chest. Her mother, noticing the distress, rushed to her side, attempting to pull her away from Rex. But it was clear something was off. Rex's eyes tracked every movement, his attention fully fixated on the child, and now the crowd seemed to shrink back in fear, afraid of what might happen next. Charlie's usually confident stance faltered. He wasn't panicking, but Emma could see the unease in his eyes. He had always controlled Rex with an iron will, but it was no use. Rex's growls had escalated, his body now trembling with heightened aggression. The man who had prided himself on being in total control was now facing the limits of his power, and for the first time in a long time, he seemed unsure. Emma's heart raced, but her movements were deliberate, calm. She had been in situations like this before, dogs driven by fear or confusion, unsure of what to do with all the tension around them. The difference was, Rex wasn't just reacting to the child. He was reacting to the crowd, to the noise, the chaos, and the sudden pressure of too many unfamiliar people surrounding him. Stepping forward, Emma kept her eyes trained on Rex, careful not to make any sudden movements. She could feel the collective gaze of the crowd on her, but she blocked it all out. This was between her and the dog. As she got closer, she lowered her body slightly, bringing herself closer to Rex's level. She spoke softly, in a tone that was both firm and reassuring, though her voice barely rose above the hum of nervous chatter around them. "Rex," she said, using a low, soothing tone. "It's okay. You're safe. We can calm this down." At first, Rex didn't react, his growls still filling the air. But Emma could sense the slightest shift. The dog's stance, once taut and aggressive, softened ever so slightly. His eyes flickered briefly in her direction, though his body was still on high alert. "Easy, Rex," she continued, inching closer, never breaking eye contact. "You don't have to be scared." The crowd held its breath. Charlie had stopped shouting commands at Rex, watching in stunned silence as Emma approached. It was almost as though time had slowed, the tension in the air hanging heavy, waiting for something to break. Emma's presence, calm and unfrightening, seemed to be having an effect. Finally, a quiet moment. Rex's growls tapered off and Emma took one more step toward him, her hand now outstretched, but not too close, just enough to let him decide whether or not to trust her. Rex's eyes locked onto her hand. For a long moment, the two of them stood there, face to face in a kind of standoff. Then, slowly, with a deliberate caution, Rex sniffed the air. His body began to relax, and the tension in the crowd seemed to dissipate just as quickly as it had appeared. The impossible had happened. Rex, the dog who had terrified the entire town, had stopped growling. For the first time, he seemed to be listening to someone other than Charlie. The crowd, once frozen in fear, slowly began to murmur among themselves, their unease turning into awe. Charlie's expression shifted from shock to disbelief as he realized what had just occurred. The control he'd always taken for granted, the unshakable bond he'd had with his dog, was now in question. And standing in front of him, a few feet from Rex, was a woman he had never met who had just done what he thought was impossible. The crowd, still in stunned silence, watched as Emma stood inches away from Rex, the dog that had always been beyond the reach of anyone else's control. She didn't rush it. She didn't try to force anything. Every movement she made was deliberate, calm, and purposeful, and somehow it was working. Rex, who had been a living embodiment of fear and aggression just moments ago, now stood still, his deep breaths slow and measured. The transition was subtle but unmistakable. The dog had relaxed. Emma's hand remained outstretched, but she wasn't expecting Rex to immediately trust her. This was about letting the dog feel safe, allowing him to make the decision to approach her, not the other way around. She continued to speak in soft tones, keeping her voice low but steady. "It's all right, Rex. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." Her words seemed to settle into the space between them, as if the tension in the air was slowly being replaced by a quiet understanding. Rex's eyes, which had once been filled with suspicion and fear, softened, and for the first time, there was a glimpse of something else: curiosity. His stance loosened, and his ears, which had been sharply pointed forward, now angled back ever so slightly. Charlie, standing at the edge of the scene, couldn't help but feel a growing sense of disbelief. He had always been proud of the bond he shared with Rex. For years, the dog had been his unwavering companion, the symbol of his authority and expertise. No one, not even the best trainers, had been able to get through to Rex in the way Emma had. It wasn't just the dog that was changing. It was the very dynamic between Charlie and Rex that was shifting. The crowd murmured, some with looks of shock, others with a growing sense of wonder. The whole scene was unfolding like something out of a dream. Here was a woman, quiet, unassuming, who had stepped into a situation that no one else could handle. And in a matter of moments, she had calmed the very dog that had been a source of fear for the entire town. Charlie cleared his throat, snapping out of his reverie. His usual bravado returned, though now it was tinged with something else, something closer to respect than arrogance. He had always been the one in control, but now he was watching someone else take the reins, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. There was a moment where his pride tugged at him, wanting to maintain that sense of superiority. After all, Rex had been his dog, but there was something undeniable about Emma's presence, something that made him realize that control didn't always come from sheer force or dominance. It came from understanding. Emma, sensing the shift in the air, took another small step forward, still watching Rex carefully. She was cautious not to overstep or make any abrupt movements. Rex's head tilted slightly, as if considering her. His intense gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, Emma could see the dog she'd been hoping to reach. Beneath the exterior of an aggressive protector, Rex was just a dog who had been misunderstood. Charlie stepped forward now, the skepticism in his expression replaced by a new kind of curiosity. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for Emma to hear. He eyed her warily, still processing what he had just witnessed. "You've got some skills, I'll give you that. But don't get ahead of yourself. Rex's loyalty is hard-earned. It takes time to really get through to him." Emma offered him a small, reassuring smile. "It's not about forcing loyalty, Mr. Dixon," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's about earning trust one step at a time. Your dog is just like any other. He just needs to know he can trust the person he's with." Charlie studied her for a moment longer, still unsure of what to make of the woman standing before him, the woman who had just done what no one had ever managed before. He had seen her skill, but there was something else that piqued his interest, something that went beyond the obvious. Emma wasn't trying to dominate Rex or show him who was in charge. She was showing the dog that he didn't need to carry the burden of fear alone. The moment stretched between them, and Charlie finally nodded, though reluctantly. "Maybe you're right," he said, his voice quieter now, the sharpness of his earlier confidence tempered with something new. Perhaps humility, perhaps respect. Maybe there's more to training than just control. Emma's gaze softened, and she took a step back, giving Rex some space to process the interaction on his own. The dog, still calm but alert, kept his eyes on her, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. For a dog that had been so fiercely protective and unpredictable, this was a moment of rare peace. Emma hadn't just proven her skill with dogs, she had shown everyone, Charlie included, that sometimes it's not about breaking the spirit of the animal, it's about understanding it. And with that, the crowd began to exhale, the tension lifting and the auction resumed, though with a very different energy than it had started. As the crowd slowly returned to their browsing and bidding, Emma remained near Rex, allowing him the time he needed to process the encounter. She stood quietly, her gaze soft but attentive, watching for any signs of discomfort or stress from the dog. Charlie, though still standing off to the side, couldn't seem to pull his eyes away from the interaction. He had known Rex for years, and never in all that time had he seen the dog respond like this to anyone other than himself. For the first time, he was forced to confront something he had always taken for granted, that maybe his bond with Rex wasn't the only way, or even the best way, to communicate with the dog. As the auction continued, a new item, a rare antique clock, was brought up for bidding. People eagerly crowded around, some whispering among themselves about the clock's value, others simply enjoying the spectacle of the auction. But through it all, Charlie kept a careful eye on Emma and Rex. It wasn't jealousy that gripped him, it was something far more unsettling. For years, he had been the undisputed authority in this town, the one everyone turned to. And now, standing in front of him, was a woman who had stepped in, and in mere moments, undone everything he thought he knew about training dogs. Charlie didn't like feeling vulnerable. It wasn't in his nature. He had built his reputation on control, on being the one who could handle any situation, no matter how difficult. Yet here he was, watching someone else handle the one thing he had always prided himself on, his connection with Rex. And that thought lingered uncomfortably in his mind. He wasn't sure if he felt threatened by Emma's skill or if he was impressed by it. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let it slide without a challenge. "Emma," he called out, his tone steady, though there was an edge to it now. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable but calm. "Yes, Mr. Dixon," she replied, her voice soft but polite, her posture relaxed. Charlie took a few steps closer, still keeping his eyes on Rex, who had remained calm but alert by her side. "I'll admit you've done something I didn't think was possible," he said, his voice now carrying the weight of a challenge. "But don't think for a second that means you've got Rex figured out. He's mine, and no one can control him like I can." Emma's expression remained neutral, but inside, she felt a surge of something she couldn't ignore. She had never set out to prove anything to anyone, let alone Charlie. But the way he phrased his words made it clear he wasn't entirely convinced by what he had seen. He wanted more. "Mr. Dixon," she said, her tone steady, "I'm not here to take control from you. I'm here to show you a different way, one that might work better for Rex, one that might be gentler." She paused, locking eyes with him. "I think Rex could learn a lot from you, but I also think you might learn something from him too." Charlie scoffed, but the challenge was unmistakable in his voice. "Learn from him. The only thing Rex needs is a firm hand. You've seen what happens when someone gets too close. This dog isn't just a pet. He's a protector, and you can't train that out of him." Emma didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting you change him, Mr. Dixon," she said, taking a step closer to Rex, who watched her with keen interest. "I'm suggesting that you work with him, not against him. There's a difference." Charlie's jaw tightened, and the crowd, who had been quietly observing the exchange, began to murmur among themselves. They could sense the rising tension between the two, a quiet standoff between pride and humility, between experience and new perspective. "You seem to think you know something I don't," Charlie said, crossing his arms and facing her fully now. "But I've been working with Rex for years. I know what works and what doesn't." "And I've been working with dogs for even longer," Emma replied. "But sometimes it's not about what works in the short term. It's about what works for the long run." Rex isn't a machine to be controlled. He's an animal with his own fears, his own instincts. You can either keep pushing him to meet your expectations, or you can help him find his own way. It's your choice. Charlie stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. The crowd was quiet now, sensing that this wasn't just a disagreement, it was the beginning of something much deeper. Something that could change the way people thought about training, about relationships between handlers and their dogs. Finally, Charlie nodded, albeit reluctantly. "You may be right," he muttered, though his words were tinged with resistance. "But let's see if your methods really work. I'm not just going to hand over Rex to anyone." Emma met his gaze without hesitation. "I wouldn't expect you to, but I'm here if you want to try something different." The challenge had been set. Neither of them knew exactly where it would lead, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about Rex anymore. It was about something much bigger, the potential for change, for growth, and for understanding. The tension between Emma and Charlie simmered as the auction continued, but beneath the surface, a subtle shift was taking place. Emma had made her point, and while Charlie wasn't fully convinced, something in his demeanor suggested he was open to seeing what she could do. The challenge wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the day wore on, the crowd began to disperse, but Emma remained by Rex's side. She wasn't there to prove anything to anyone, least of all Charlie. Her focus was solely on the dog, whose guarded eyes were now softer, more inquisitive. Rex hadn't fully relaxed, but Emma could see the potential. He was no longer reacting from a place of fear. Now he was processing, learning to trust. Charlie had retreated to a corner of the square, talking quietly to a few of the other auction goers, but his eyes kept drifting back to Emma and Rex, as if he couldn't help but watch the quiet interaction between the woman and his dog. There was a growing curiosity in his gaze, something Emma hadn't noticed before. It was almost as if he was waiting for her to fail, hoping she'd prove him right, that no one could control Rex except him. But as time passed, Charlie found himself increasingly impressed. Rex, the dog who had always been a force of nature, wasn't reacting the way he had before. He was still tense, still watchful, but his focus had shifted from aggression to curiosity. Emma's approach had brought out something in him, a flicker of trust that Charlie had never seen before. After a while, Emma turned toward Charlie, who was now standing near a stall at the edge of the square, his arms crossed. He had been watching her carefully, and when their eyes met, Emma took a slow step forward. "Are you willing to give it a try?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. Charlie hesitated for a moment, then let out a breath. "You really think you can get through them?" "I think I've already started," Emma replied. "But it's going to take time. It's not about forcing him to be something he's not. It's about working with him, understanding his triggers, and helping him find a way to feel secure in a world that's not always predictable for him." Charlie's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't someone who easily admitted when he was wrong, but Emma's words made sense. He had always been so focused on controlling Rex, on asserting his dominance, that he hadn't truly considered what the dog might need emotionally. Maybe there was a better way, a way that didn't involve constant tension and fear. He looked at Rex, who was now sitting calmly at Emma's feet, his posture still alert but not defensive. The dog was watching him, waiting, almost as if he, too, was considering the possibility of change. Finally, Charlie spoke, his voice softer than it had been all day. "All right," he said, his gaze lingering on Emma. "Let's see where this goes. But I'm telling you now, if things go sideways, I'm stepping in." Emma smiled gently, nodding in agreement. "Fair enough. But I think you'll find Rex is more than capable of learning. It's all about taking the first step." Charlie walked over to where Emma stood, his steps slower than usual, as though he was cautiously entering unfamiliar territory. He stopped a few feet away from Rex, his posture still rigid, unsure of what to expect. Emma could sense his hesitation, but she didn't rush him. She allowed him to take his time, to feel the situation out. "Go ahead," Emma said, nodding toward Rex. "Just try approaching him slowly. No commands, no expectations. Let him come to you when he's ready." Charlie's expression was guarded, but he stepped forward cautiously. Rex's eyes followed his every move, and for a moment, the two shared a quiet exchange. one that spoke volumes without a word being said. Rex's muscles tensed briefly, but then he took a tentative step toward Charlie, his tail lowering slightly. It was a small movement, but it was significant. Rex was beginning to understand that not all approaches were threats. Charlie's hand hovered in the air for a moment, unsure of whether to reach out, but Emma's calm gaze encouraged him to take the next step. Slowly, he extended his hand toward Rex, who sniffed it cautiously. The dog didn't growl or back away. Instead, he stood still, studying Charlie's hand. It was as if he were giving the man a chance that had never been offered before. For a long moment, there was only silence, the quiet weight of the moment hanging between them. And then, to everyone's surprise, Rex lowered his head, allowing Charlie to gently scratch behind his ears. It was a subtle gesture, but it spoke volumes about the trust that was beginning to form. Charlie's face softened, and for the first time that day, Emma saw a glimpse of something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. Charlie had always been the one in control, the one who made others feel small. But in this moment, with Rex and Emma standing beside him, he was beginning to understand what true connection felt like. "Well, I'll be damned," Charlie muttered again, but this time his voice was laced with admiration. "You weren't lying, were you?" Emma's smile was gentle, but there was a quiet pride in her eyes. "It's not about lying, Mr. Dixon. It's about seeing the possibility. Rex has a lot of potential. He just needs someone who can understand him." Charlie nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling into his mind. "Maybe I've been going about this all wrong," he admitted quietly. Emma looked at him and Rex, then back at Charlie, the unspoken understanding between them beginning to take root. "We all have a lot to learn," she said softly, "but we're on the right path now." As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the square, the once tense atmosphere had shifted into something lighter, more hopeful. The auction was nearly over, but the real transformation was happening off to the side, where Emma, Charlie, and Rex stood. It was a quiet, pivotal moment that no one in the crowd would soon forget, an unlikely trio standing together, not as adversaries, but as partners on a new journey. Charlie, who had always prided himself on his ability to control, was now learning what it meant to trust. Rex, the dog he had raised and trained, was no longer just a tool of protection or dominance. He was an individual with his own emotions, his own instincts. And Emma, the woman who had quietly stepped in and shown him another way, was now a vital part of that journey. As Rex continued to stand calmly at Charlie's side, Emma watched the subtle shifts in the dog's behavior. His once tightly wound posture had relaxed even further, and his tail, which had been low and stiff earlier, now hung in a more neutral position. He wasn't the aggressive, unpredictable animal that had first arrived at the auction. He was a dog who was beginning to understand that the world didn't have to be a constant threat, and Emma had played a role in that transformation. Charlie's gaze shifted from Rex to Emma, his expression one of quiet reflection. "I never thought it would be this easy," he admitted, his voice almost soft. "I always thought you had to break a dog down before you could get through to them. But with Rex, it's like you've just been waiting for him to come around." Emma gave a small, knowing smile. "That's the thing, Mr. Dixon. It's not about breaking them. It's about meeting them where they are. Dogs, like people, need to feel safe before they can learn anything." Charlie seemed to mull this over, nodding slowly. "I'll be honest," he said, glancing at Rex. "I never thought I could do things differently. Rex and I have always been a team, but it's always been about me calling the shots. I don't know what's next, but I do know this. I've seen something today that I didn't expect, and I owe you for that." Emma's expression softened, her eyes reflecting the quiet understanding she felt. "It's not about owing anyone, Mr. Dixon. It's about understanding that there's always room to grow, both for you and for Rex. You're both capable of learning, of evolving. The question is, are you willing to do it together?" Charlie didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at Rex, who was now sitting at his feet, his eyes steady and calm. For the first time, Charlie didn't see a dog he had to control. He saw a companion, one who had as much to teach him as he had to teach the dog. The crowd had largely dispersed by now, but a few people lingered, chatting quietly, still discussing the day's events. Emma, sensing that the moment between Charlie and Rex was something private, took a few steps back, giving them space. It wasn't her place to interfere anymore. She had done what she came to do. As she turned to leave, Charlie's voice called out to her. "Emma," he said, his tone a bit more tentative than before. I just wanted to thank you. You've done more for Rex than I ever thought possible." She paused and turned back to face him. "You don't need to thank me," she replied. "You're the one who will do the hard work. I'm just here to show you a new way." Charlie nodded. "I think I'll take that lesson to heart." For the first time all day, there was a sense of calm around Charlie, a stillness in his eyes that suggested he was finally at peace with the changes unfolding before him. Rex, too, seemed to sense the shift. The dog's posture had softened, his demeanor no longer one of alert defensiveness, but of quiet contentment. It was clear that the bond between the two was far from broken. It was simply evolving, growing into something healthier, something built on mutual respect rather than dominance. Emma smiled softly and took a few more steps backward, her heart lighter now. She had come into this situation expecting nothing more than to help. But what she had left with was far more meaningful than any success with a dog. She had witnessed the beginning of a new chapter for both Charlie and Rex, one where trust, patience, and understanding would guide the way forward. As Emma walked away, she glanced back at the two of them one last time. Charlie was now kneeling beside Rex, gently stroking his fur, and for the first time, there was no urgency in his movements. There was no need for control, just two beings quietly connecting. The day was over, but the real work, the real journey, was just beginning. And Emma knew, deep down, that the best part of the story had yet to unfold.